Hi, everyone. My name's Janie, and my project partner Tim and I are going to be sharing our thoughts on how we should define and measure poverty. So, first up, our argument. We first want to just go ahead and define poverty as living below the level of a shared understanding of human well being that suits one's human dignity. Now, this is very vague, so this is why we have to measure it and look at a multitude of different factors. So in order to measure poverty, to then figure out who is in need of help in our society, we think poverty should be measured by combining strategies from the Multidimensional Poverty Index, or the MPI, and the Supplemental Poverty Measure, which is the SPM, both of which we've learned about in class and talked about. This method would allow for examination of income, and that would include non-cash government assistance, which we think is important to the full picture, and important quality of life and deprivation indicators. So we've got categories in health, education, and standard of living. All of these things we think are really important for getting a full picture of who is in poverty and who is not. Okay, so first, for our subtopics, we wanted to talk about what's coming into the household. And yes, that's income, but like we mentioned earlier, it's also non-cash government assistance and benefits. So this is where we think the SPM is really beneficial. What the SPM does is that it also subtracts money used for medical and childcare expenses and then taxes as well, which the OPM does not do. It also adds money for tax credits if applicable. And what a tax credit is and why it's important is that if your income is not enough to which you're going to be taxed on it, then you actually receive money instead of having to pay those taxes. And so all of these things, the medical expenses, childcare expenses, the non-cash government assistance, which that refers to things like SNAP, so food assistance, stuff like that. This all helps us just get a more accurate representation of what's actually coming into the home. And the OPM, as we said, does not take into account taxes or non-cash government assistance. And this is all important because we're so focused on purchasing power. And why is that? Because when we think about poverty, we're not actually worried about what's in people's pockets. We're worried about what they can then do with that. So can they buy food? Can they buy everything they need for their house? Because we're really caring about quality of life. So these things like food, clothing, shelter, utilities, technology, internet, income is how they get all these things. Income and then these benefits and tax credits and all that to then meet their needs to have a dignified life. Okay, next we want to talk about standard of living. So since we're using the MPI, their system has deprivation indicators that then we talked about there's one for health, education, and then standard of living. So these would include, does the household have access to clean drinking water? How far away is that water? Is someone at risk when they have to go get it? Or is it just right in the home? Do they have electricity? What's their sanitation system? So this refers to the restroom. That's important, and that leads back to health as well. Do they have adequate housing? What's the condition of their housing? All these things, helping us figure out where a family is. And then because we're combining the MPI with the SPM actually adjusts for non-traditional families and household compositions, so cohabitors, foster children, etc., unrelated children that are living in the home, so that would be like foster children or just people that aren't in your direct family, so they would be excluded from the OPM universe but included in the SPM universe. That's a quote from the Schreider reading that we did. It also adjusts for the geographical differences because obviously we know standards of living vary country to country. They vary like region to region, city to rural, anything like that. We know that the standards of living are different in Manhattan than they are in a small town in Virginia. And so the SPM does a good job of adjusting for that. They're also adjusted for 3 housing tenure groups. So whether you're renting, whether you own your home or you have a mortgage. And so when we look at all of those things that the SPM accounts for, combined with the physical, concrete deprivation indicators and what state is the family living in, then we get a much more accurate and detailed picture of the daily life in a household and thus what their actual quality of life is, so that we can decide whether they need government help or we need to change institutions or what we need to do from there and versus who does not need help. So one more note we want to make clear on standards of living when talking about the MPI. We're going to touch on this again later, but because of the global nature of the MPI, when examining affluent countries, our approach would have to be a little bit different. So we would place more weight on health and education rather than on standards of living to ensure a more fair and accurate picture of who is living in poverty relative to those around them as well. Okay, so next we want to talk about health. Since we were just talking about standards of living, these are very closely related and intertwined. So first of all, since we are using the SPM, it factors in health benefits and healthcare costs, which is good because you're getting that monetary side of things, as well as the indicators from the MPI. So the indicators, deprivation indicators that the MPI uses for health are child mortality and nutrition. And more specifically, is anyone underweight in the household and has a child died in the last 5 years? We do acknowledge that these are not the only things that determine whether a household is healthy or not, but they're definitely good proxies and indicators of the overall health and well-being of the household. So yeah, by looking at these standards of living indicators combined with the health indicators and then the health benefits and the healthcare costs, we get a fairly complete idea of how healthy a household is, how much it's costing them to be this level of healthy or non-healthy, and how much government benefits are helping in this category. And then we're able to see who needs more or less government help.
Hey everyone, Tim here. Thank you, Janie, for covering the SPM and the health and standards of living for the MPI. Now, I have more for you on why we are factoring in the MPI. To start, there are a couple issues with the SPM, where there are areas of our measurement of poverty in which it does not cover. It is too binary and does not factor in any capabilities. You often hear that the SPM is not as useful because it focuses solely on income in terms of poverty, and money is not everything when measuring poverty. Transitioning to why we are using the MPI, well, we need a measurement of capabilities, but not quite like the capabilities approach that was brought to fame by Sen and later was elaborated on by Martha Nussbaum. So, Janie and I were doing research on the MPI and its extensions past the capabilities approach. And we had a conversation with ChatGPT, and it actually said something super valuable to our argument. It said that, quote, the MPI is essentially an operationalization of the capabilities approach. It translates Sen's philosophical ideas into a concrete, measurable framework that can be used by governments and institutions to track and table poverty in a more human-centered way. So the MPI piggybacks off of the capabilities approach and supports Janie and I's conclusion of how we want to measure poverty, which, as Janie said before, is not all about what's in your pockets. It's what you can do with this money. Finally, quote, the MPI is an annual international measure, according to the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative. According to the Global Multidimensional Poverty Index from 2024, of the 1.1 billion poor people, 962 million, which is 83.7%, live in rural areas. This rural-urban poverty disparity is stark worldwide, with 28% of the rural population living in poverty compared with just 6.6% in urban areas. The MPI completes our list in ways that poverty should be measured. It is valuable in multiple different areas when studying poverty, and the addition of this measurement to the SPM allows for a full range of accurate poverty measurements to be made. So next, we were also asked to include an analyzation of Robert Rector and his view on modern poverty, and sort of the strengths and weaknesses. Rector's article emphasizes that over time, poverty has actually gradually improved, and that poverty is not what many people actually think of when they think about poverty. This claim was backed up using RECS data from 2005, analyzing access to amenities in poor households. Living conditions are analyzed based on the 30-item list of amenities, so a household score can range from 0 to 30, depending on what you have. Quote, poor households had a median household amenity score of 14. This is from Rector. The households had items such as air conditioning, a clothes washer and dryer, cordless phones, and a coffee maker. Rector continues his argument that, quote, census poverty reports are misleading and inaccurate. Rector breaks down the U.S. Census Bureau report that claims that over 35 million Americans live in poverty. In his mind, there are two flaws in the report. One, quote, the report provides no information on the actual living conditions of the persons identified as poor. He says that it states a number of poor people rather than what made them poor. And two, the report massively, quote, undercounts the economic resources provided to poor people. It asserts that a household is poor if its, quote, money income falls below a specified threshold. He says poor persons have many more economic resources than the census claims. So, overall, this is a very well-rounded argument in that Rector's claims are thoroughly backed up with specific evidence that the public can have a severe lack of understanding of the true poverty occurring in the modern economy. However, there can be arguments made contrasting said arguments. For one, possession of such amenities does not directly correlate to financial stability or overall household well-being. In the data used by Rector, there was no indication that every amenity in these households was fully functional or up to date. Secondly, there is no account for geographical conditions and cost of living. Households might have less amenities in San Francisco, for example, because cost of living is so much higher than rural Alabama, for example. Finally, the study does not take into account access to education for children. Some children can have homeschool amenities because they simply can't pay for public education. And so while Rector makes a valuable argument towards the modern measurements of poverty, there are too many variables in which he leaves out of his equation to take his conclusions into full consideration. And to conclude, Janie and I firmly believe that the SPM and the MPI are very valuable strategies in the world's pursuit to measuring poverty to the best of our ability. Will there ever be one perfect method? We definitely do not know that for sure as of right now, as there are countless philosophers, researchers, and educators that have various opinions on this worldwide issue, but this is the best way to go about it as of right now. Thank you guys, we hope you liked the video, and here are our final citations. Thank you.